Welcome to Blend's Localization Leaders podcast, where we speak to industry leaders who are paving the way for advancements in localization and global language operations. This episode is hosted by Yoav Ziv, Blend's CEO. Tune in for Yoav's discussion with Jaap van der Meer, CEO of TAUS.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Localization Leaders podcast. My name is Yoav Ziv. I'm the CEO of Blend, and I'm super excited to host today my good friend Jaap van der Meer, CEO of TAUS. Hey, Jaap,
Hi, Joe.
welcome
My
aboard.
pleasure to be here.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so Jaap, let's just jump right into that with kind of introduction to whoever doesn't know you. I'm sure not too many in the industry don't know you, but just tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey. How did you start TAUS? What made you start TAUS in the first place?
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's a long story, as you can imagine. Given that I'm somewhat older now, and I've been working in this industry for half a century. I'm just kidding now, but long
A
time.
quarter of a century.
It was an accident. I before TAUS, very briefly, I studied at the University of Amsterdam linguistics and literature, and then found myself a job on the side of my studies at a company that I didn't know before, but it had three letters: IBM, International Business Machines, and they needed somebody to proofread all of their materials, document and brochures and what have you, which I was very capable to do, of course, with my linguistic studies. But one thing led to another. I bypassed the Randstad, the temporary labor service company, and started invoicing directly to IBM. And then the first desktop computers came out, and they had lots of manuals, and they needed to be translated. So, yeah, I started a business. I started maybe one of the first localization companies working for IBM, and then Microsoft and all those other computer companies joined and started outsourcing the translation work to us, which then gradually became localization work. And so I built up this company in Europe with offices in all the capitals of the European countries, providing this service to the computer industry. We sold this company to R. Donnelly, and after some further changes, that became Lionbridge, and then I joined another company headquarters from Salt Lake City called ALPS, Automated Language Processing Systems, which was a spin-off of Brigham Young University, which obviously had this mission to translate into all the languages of the world. And that was a machine translation company by origin, so to say, but it span off into services because machine translation technology couldn't be sold just like that. It wasn't working very well compared to what we see today. Anyway, that was a great adventure. It was a Nasdaq listed company, and we managed to make it grow very quickly, and that company then later became part of SDL and then RWS. So I have my roots in some of the big companies in this industry.
Yeah.
Always been from the start. I had no ideas about computers. I was not a technologist, but when I started translating in these early days for IBM and some of the software companies, I didn't think it was a very rewarding kind of an intellectually challenging job, with for somebody with an academic background. So I very quickly became intrigued by what computers could do for language. Obviously at the time, computers did number crunching, but not much with text apart from word processing and desktop publishing kind of applications. So in my first companies, I started investing in technology. First, translation memory software, dictionary lookup tools, and one thing led to another. We started doing corpus analysis and sort of NLP, early applications of NLP related applications. So yeah, I learned it on the job, so to say, and became a big advocate of automation. So when I was done running big global translation companies, well, big at the time, I kind of naturally moved into sort of more of a think tank idea, because that was early this century, around 2005. I organized meetings for early adopters of machine translation. That was the time of statistical machine translation, to come together and talk about whether this technology could potentially be implemented and used for production for real services. And that became TAUS. And so we started as a think tank, but soon became collectors of data, of language data or translation data. Everybody said in these meetings that we organized, well, can I have your translation memory data? Because if we have more data, then we can train our statistical engines to do a better job. And so I thought it was a great idea. We had a small team in San Francisco, working together for a couple of months, and we had a first incarnation of TAUS Data Cloud, a reciprocal model. If you upload your data, you earn credits to download other people's data, and so that was a good formula. Everybody started
It's
contributing.
interesting because it was before everyone really understood the importance of data.
Yeah. We started this even before Google Translate.
Yeah.
So Google
The
Translate,
whole
Google
economy
people.
of data is relatively new, and you did it.
Way too early. I mean, everybody who knows me says, Jaap, you're always too early. But the thing is, what I kind of told myself is, everything is accelerating, innovation, automation. So eventually, this time gap is getting smaller and smaller, and meaning that if I stay on longer, then I'm just in time. So now I think I'm just in time.
It's really fascinating because I'm new to the industry. I'm relatively new. I'm already almost a year, but not even a year. And you can see that a lot of times people with a lot of experience in the industry are somewhat slower maybe to adapt to changes, or they are more skeptic about changes. And we're talking to you is a real opportunity because you have both the experience of, like you say, almost half a century of working in the industry from the very first time, of almost from the very first days and until now, but also you are a very forward-looking individual, and you've always been looking for the next thing. And now, and I'm very proud that we are using your latest technology, which is Epic, the QE and APE engines. And I wonder if you could maybe share a little bit about the QE technology, the QE concept. What led you to develop it, and what does it do? How does it work?
Sure. Yeah. Maybe back up a little bit because we and tell you how it happened, because we became kind of quasi owners of the largest repository of data in our industry through the TAUS Data Cloud. Massive volumes, and at some point 70 billion words in 500 language pairs. And so it was very tempting for us to develop our own machine translation platform, because everybody knows to get a good machine translation engine, you need data and you need algorithms. And if you then, we did this often at our events, asking the gurus, what is more important, the algorithms or the data? And typically the answer would be data, because algorithms, are generally available, very often open source.
Yeah.
So we said, should we launch our own machine translation engine, since we have direct access to so much data? But we never did this after careful considerations several times over the years, because we said, well, there will be plenty of machine translation engines out there. And by the way, the big tech companies, as a small company, we can't beat them anyway.
By the
we
way,
don't have that presence.
that's the reason it was one of my first decisions coming to blend and into the industry. I said, I'm not going to create a machine translation capability. I mean, I'm too small for that. There are
Yeah,
enough big players that will do that, and I can ride on their effort, right? So,
yeah, yeah. But it was kind of always stayed in our mind, like, yeah, but how do we then utilize all this data? Because
yeah,
at some point, we started a transformation from a think tank to a software and a data company. We have more people working on our data, and we sold the data. We managed the data, cleaned it, and made more specific, domain specific data sets that was very helpful to everybody who was developing machine translation from Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, to also the dedicated MT companies. So at some point, Uber came to us and said, "Hey, guys, can you help us?" And this is now more than it's about 3 years ago. Can you help us develop a quality prediction model, quality estimation model? And our team said, "Sure, yeah, we have the data, we can do that." I must admit, I heard about it, that it was a research topic for maybe a decade now, but there were no practical implementations. Nobody was doing it. So we were very glad that Uber asked us this question, and we started building it, training models, and then maybe to our own surprise as well, at least to mine, this model was able to assess whether something was properly translated or not. So and that sort of was still the job of the human post editor, of the LQA specialist, right, in many of the translation or localization
yeah.
companies. So that was an eye opener, and then we started to refine it and build it, and the infrastructure around it to make it scalable. So that's how it happened, and now we have a good
So how
destiny
does it
for our
work?
data.
Can you maybe shed some details, shed some light on what can people
Yeah, sure.
from?
Well,
Because I gotta tell you, I mean, again, to me it's relatively easy because I never deployed my own. I mean, I'm new to the industry, so LQA concepts with grading of specific elements of of each element of the translation. To me, it was one option, and then
yeah,
automatic QE was another option. And but I'm sure that for many people, it's kind of it takes time to adjust to the fact that
yeah, yeah.
it's just basically one number, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the way it works is not very different from how machine translation works. It uses transformers, embeddings, mathematical models in a kind of a language agnostic kind of, you could say, universal representation of languages. So you convert, transform a sentence into a mathematical representation, and then you match that with another language, and so then you get a score, like how close are the two segments here going from one language into another. And you train the models with data, same as you train machine translation models, except now you feed it with also bad quality or negative examples. So the model learns how to distinguish good from bad quality and all the nuances. Um, so it checks on accuracy, but also on fluency. And it's doing as some people say, some of our users say, an astonishing, surprisingly accurate kind of judgment of quality. But a lot of the work goes into finding the right data, tuning the models, a lot of empirical work. But it's very different from how obviously generations of QA people in the translation industry have been trained and doing their work, which is much more on human judgment, which is slow. I mean, every translation, every translated text or segment needs to be checked by human eyes, and here you
Yeah.
you do hundreds of pages in just minutes. It's so it brings the scalability into
Yeah,
the practice of
I got to say that
localization.
for us, we also needed to kind of vet the model with our own experiments. And what we did is we ran twice, right? We ran the model, and then we basically, just for the audience that may not be aware of how it works, you get a grade, and our kind of translation platform, you can set the grade which is acceptable, right? So you
Yeah,
can do it at 99%, you could do it at 70%, and we were wondering, first, is there a correlation between the grade that the machine provides and whether a linguist later on actually touches or thinks that the machine translation needs to be uh, amended or corrected, edited. And
yeah,
we saw a very, very good correlation between the
yeah,
grade of the model and the grade of the people. Um, and for us, and obviously, if you choose your pass grade to be low, then you have potentially have a lot of errors. But if you are using the
yeah,
right and you need to test it out, and you need to find the right model for you, or the right number for you, and then
yeah.
there is a very, very strong correlation between what the model says and what the person would say.
Right.
And I think that's the right way to do it. But for us, it was, yeah, we needed to make this uh, mind shift between the traditional LQA models, which we still do but obviously only on a sampling of data, because you cannot do it for everything that you
Yeah,
translate, to the automatic number, and it took us time to trust the numbers, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
eventually we do.
Yeah, that's it. It's very hard for people who are trained very traditionally, trusting their own judgment, to say, "Oh no, I trust the model." So we provide, we call a confidence index, where you can check by language, for each language, what sort of the confidence level is and what the risk factor is. So you
Yeah,
can
exactly.
then indeed balance, like, well, I'm dialing up my threshold a little bit so that I have less risk, of getting false positives, and then I'm going to trust, and indeed, many of our customers that come online with Epic, they run sort of this in parallel for some time with
Yeah,
humans
like
doing
we
the
did.
judgment, and see
Yeah,
how
we did. We obviously run
yeah,
again millions and millions of words. It was relatively easy for us to validate that over a relatively short period of time because of the volumes that we are handling.
yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, it works out. But I wanted to ask you, one of the other things that surprised me about, I don't know if surprise is the right term, but so a lot of the language service providers are in it's this a little bit of a dilemma. What do you do with the technology? I mean, do you use it to reduce your own cost and fight the price pressure?
yeah,
Or do you use it in order to reduce the price to the customer and offer proactively the most cost-effective solution that you can have? I mean, obviously, if you offer proactively a lower cost, then you are, to some extent cannibalizing the industry.
yeah,
But at the same time, if you don't offer this lower cost, that everyone knows that you are using MT, and everyone knows you are using QE, right?
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
kind of a weird, and that's like, again, to me it was relatively easy because I come from outside the industry and I have no prejudice, and I said,
yeah,
guys, we are using MT and QE, and we should first acknowledge that to the customers. Second, we should transfer the savings to them, and
yeah,
we should let them choose. Do they want to use this practice, or do they want full human translation? And
yeah,
that's why we kind of came with Flexi. What do you make of the dilemma of the
yeah. That's
LSP
that's an
market?
that's a very interesting question, and I was talking to a CEO of one of the super agencies some time ago, and He said, this is interesting. It reminds me of the CEO of Unilever, who said, I know that 50% of my translation, of my marketing budget, of my advertising budget, is wasted, except, I don't know which half, which 50%. And I thought, well, that's interesting. You could apply the same to localization, to translation, because 50%, probably more than 50% of the machine translation output is good to go. But still, we have humans looking at everything because we don't know which 50%. So it's a huge saving that's out there. And we can indeed harvest that. We can realize that efficiency gain with quality estimation, with Epic. Now, this happened before in the translation industry when translation memory was invented. That's the
Also
advantage I
when,
have
it
now, of
hit.
course, with
Okay.
my long history. I started translating on a typewriter with a magnetic card, so we could store 1.5 page on one card and then put a new card in. Anyway, when desktop computers came out and Trados and we ourselves, actually my company, we developed the first translation memory tools. They were designed to work on a desktop computer, and so translators and small agencies could improve their margins. But of course, customers found out and said, "Hey, we want this." So then the first TMS systems, we centralized the translation
By the way,
memories.
it's the same people know me. Like people who listen to this podcast know that I often compare what's happening to the language industry to what's happening to the software development industry where I came from. And
Yeah,
it's the same with test automation. In the beginning, you would take as a testing provider, you would take a testing project,
yeah,
and then you would automate the testing without telling the customer that you're actually automating the testing so that you can get the margin. Now, after a couple of years, customers saying, well, you are going to automate this, right? So why
yeah,
don't you offer me the lower rates to begin with? And
yeah.
then it's kind of changed. It's the same thing.
Yeah, so that exactly, and so then to answer your question with that allegory, it's just a matter of time. I would say because one of the things that people say, like a CSA research say, the localization industry is handling only 1% or less than 1% of the content that's out there in the world. So if we make it more efficient, you'll get more content, the volume of your business will grow.
Yeah.
But will it really, and will it go fast enough to compensate for the loss in revenue when all your prices are going down, and if you give all this benefit?
Well, I
So
gotta
maybe
tell you,
you,
I think I take Blend, one of the roles that Blend took upon itself, and I'm very proud of this decision, is to lead the process of like uncovering the
yeah,
like we want to deliver the best, the most effective way of
yeah,
of quality output,
yeah,
right? And so I strongly, like in my gut, believe that that's the only way to approach
yeah,
business, right? If you
yeah,
can't, you will eventually disappear. And if
yeah,
you can,
absolutely,
then yeah, so that's kind of where we are. But so we're getting we are almost close to the end of
oh,
the
okay,
podcast. But yeah, we could talk forever. But I actually do have a tough question for you.
yeah,
So I think everyone kind of understands that the future of translation technology is very, very different than the segment-based, neural network machine translation, and with translation memory that is segment-based, and then all the fuzzy matches, and then the
yeah,
cut tool that is segment-based. It's basically, it's not there yet, but once someone comes up with a reliable LLM and RAG technology, that will really change everything. The text is going to be more natively translated, I would say, right?
hmm,
With the context of the entire document, not segment by segment.
yeah,
How do you see that impacting the Epic approach, right? Because today, what Epic does is you send segments,
yeah, yeah,
right? And it fits into the current
yeah, into the current
architecture,
format.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was only natural to start with a segment-based system, obviously. But we do get requests now regularly from customers. Can you provide a document-based or file-based or batch processing? And we're working on that, and we probably have that ready within the next cycle. So there will be a file-based option in Epic. We need to adapt, and we're working on also a self-hosting language model, so that we don't need to send everything out to public
Yeah, I mean, I think
platforms.
it's gonna probably be in parallel, segment based and file based, or
Yeah,
it's not even file based. It's like, let's call it just text
document
based, like
based.
not specific to a segment, because
Yeah,
sometimes it will be in more of a real time messages,
yeah,
like if you are handling a real continuous localization, and sometimes it will be documents, and sometimes it will be segments,
yeah,
depending on the transition. But eventually, if you look 10 years into the future, I think it's pretty obvious that the whole segment concept will
yeah,
fade.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so you see these technologies being relevant also in that reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, of course, the speed, the pace of change
Yeah, you
is
can never know.
changing, and we don't look. I mean, you can't look much further ahead than maybe 1 or 2 years at the moment, but
Maybe, maybe.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
And but yeah, for the time being, you may have seen that on our new website. We refer to TAUS or to Epic as your AI quality companion. So we already make it a bit broader, and we can imagine, that it's all about validation, verification, as a scalability kind of help to the human in the core, if you like.
yeah, yeah.
And it will become much broader. I mean, domain-specific applications, but also a feature in knowledge platforms, knowledge,
Content
discovery
creation.
platforms. Yeah,
Yeah. All right.
it's
Amazing. Interesting. So, yeah, we have a habit in the podcast to finish with a few rapid questions.
okay.
Okay. So not much thought. You don't have to answer, but if you do, that's great. So let's start with number one. What's your favorite language other than maybe Dutch?
Oh, I was going to say Dutch probably because you hardly ever speak Dutch anymore. Even in our own team, we only have 3 Dutch people, maybe. So although we're in Amsterdam, but wherever we have a vacancy and we advertise, we get most of the time no Dutch people joining. So
Yeah,
no, but yeah, I like Italian too, because
I have to. My favorite language is Italian.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Do you speak Italian or?
I don't, but I actually have, I have many Italian friends.
Yeah,
Actually, some of my really best friends. I lived many years in New York, and I have really, really two very, very good friends. Both of
yeah.
them named Luca, and both of them live in New York, and both of them are very, very Italian.
Okay.
And I learned to love the language, and
Yeah,
especially the musicality of it.
yeah,
Right? There is because there are no every word ends with a vowel,
yeah,
so it's almost like a song, right?
yeah, yeah.
And my second language is favorite language is Brazilian Portuguese, which is also like very,
Portuguese, yeah.
very
Difficult
but
language.
Brazilian Portuguese much more than the Portugal Portuguese.
Right.
For some reason, it sounds different.
I have a
Right. So
Brazilian daughter. I have a Brazilian daughter-in-law, so I should learn Portuguese now. But
yeah,
yeah,
there's something almost like it's
yeah,
sensual about the Brazilian Portuguese, and I find it.
yeah,
Also, the whole samba and culture,
yeah, yeah.
bossa nova, everything. Yeah, I like it a lot. Anyway, what's your favorite place that you have traveled to?
Well, Taos, Taos, New Mexico. Yeah,
I would imagine.
yeah. I discovered that place only after somebody said, "Hey, Jaap, you should organize an event in Taos, New Mexico." I said, "Taos, New." Looked it up, and we traveled there, and And so, yeah, we had a foundational meeting of the TAUS data, sort of TAUS data cloud there, because it's a remote place, and adobe houses in the middle of the desert, next to the Rio Grande. Beautiful,
Absolutely, I've
beautiful.
been there. Yeah, and
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you
yeah,
know it. Yeah.
I know it. I actually did a year-round trip across the U.S. I lived
Yeah.
many years in the U.S. and I kind of finished my 10 years there during COVID
Okay.
with a year-round trip.
Yeah.
And one of the like I would say the state that I stayed the most time was New Mexico, and I spent a little over a week in Taos,
Okay.
in a little like hut
Yeah.
in the forest, and I skied and we did.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and the thing that I like about New Mexico the most is that if I would drop you in almost any city in the U.S., any suburb, let's say, any downtown in the U.S., other than Manhattan and Chicago, which are very distinct,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that you will be able to tell the difference unless you are in New Mexico,
Yeah.
right? New Mexico has a very, very different look and feel,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very,
I
very
agree totally. Yeah. Yeah.
right. Awesome. So then, given the fact that you have so much experience, I will ask you one last question. What is the best localization advice that you ever got?
Oh, that's a tough one. Um I haven't thought about that, but
So what would
I
be what
never
would be
I
a
never
localization
I
advice?
actually never think of myself as being sort of a localization person, actually. But so it's more general. What I've kind of said to myself once is that if you're on the service side in this industry, you can only be as good as your best customer. So it's one thing that I learned was really get deep into your customers' kind of business perspective and see what you can learn from that and copy that. And so, in that sense, yeah, I think maybe I've done that in the past with IBM, how I started in the business, and now, as I told you, this story recently with Uber. When they formulated this requirement, that was an eye opener, and you learn from that. So I think if you ask me to give any advice to the listeners to this podcast, but everybody knows this, of course. You know your
As
customer
a customer
and
today of
learn
ours,
from that.
I can attest that this is certainly something that I feel in our day-to-day relationship, and it is a pleasure to be a customer
Yeah.
of yours. So thank you for that. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me and participating in the podcast. I hope that our audience found it interesting. And that's it, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and see you in the next episode of Localization Leader podcast. Thank you.